So 5.3, I think this is our last lesson in this unit. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. So we're gonna aim to take our test on Friday of this week. Everything okay, FA? Okay. We're gonna take our test on Friday, so be prepared for that. Like I said, this is a relatively short unit. We only had I think 3 or 4 lessons. 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. Yeah, 4 lessons total, so not a whole lot to worry about, but it does connect to our last unit, Unit 3. So if you are planning on reviewing some stuff this week to prepare, I would go back in Google Classroom and watch some of those videos from Unit 3, as well as the videos from this one, Unit 4. So we're writing equations. We've done a couple different situations. We've wrote equations from tables in 5.2. We wrote equations from a point and a slope, right? So we had an m and a point, and we were able to write our equation that way. We've written our equations from graphs as well in 5.0, right? Figure out the b, rise over run. So the fourth and final is from situations, and a situation just means basically a word problem, like what we see here in the box. Can I have a volunteer that wants to read out this box for me so I can rest my voice for 2 seconds? Go ahead, Darius. Beautiful. So we're talking about a bowling alley here. Anyone ever been to a bowling alley before? Handful of us. Good. I'm pretty sure last year, I don't know if they'll do it this year, but the 8th grade field trip at the end of the year was to the bowling alley. I forget what it's called. Country Club Lanes, something like that. So hopefully you guys get to go on that at the end of the year. They've talked about going to Disneyland, but I don't know if that's going to happen because not enough people signed up last year. But anyway, if you've been to a bowling alley, you should know, hopefully. Well, you probably weren't the one that paid, but how bowling alleys work is you get a flat rate to rent a pair of shoes for the amount of time that you're there, and then you pay an additional fee per game that you bowl, right? A game being 10 frames, right? So 10 rounds, you go up there and throw it, and it costs a certain amount of money to rent the shoes. So we're going to write an equation that represents the total amount of money spent bowling, including the shoe rental and the amount of games that you play. So the first thing we want to do here is fill out our table. Let's take note that X represents the number of games bowled. All right, my X was purple. X is the number of games bowled, and this is going to be important in a little bit to know what X and Y represent. And Y is my total dollars spent. All right, typically Y is always going to represent our money. A lot of the problems we'll see on worksheet 24 today involve money. So Y is essentially always going to be the total amount. So let's think about this, right? If we bowled 0 games, how much money do you think we have spent so far at the bowling alley?
0.
That's a great assumption. The reason why it's not 0 is because of this number right here. So before you've even bowled any games, what do you have to go rent? A pair of shoes. So after 0 games bowled, you've spent $3 because you had to pay $3 to rent the pair of shoes. All right? Remember, the B value that we've always talked about means where you begin, right? If we have the point 0, 3, that means we begin by spending $3 on the shoes. Give me a thumbs up if that makes a little bit of sense. Okay. Our B, when we have a word problem like this, is called our initial value. Go ahead and add that in there. Our initial value. It's where we begin or where we start. So in this case, before we even start bowling, we got to spend $3 to rent the shoes. That's going to be our initial value, right? So we've got 0 games bowled. Let's say you want to bowl just 1 game. Quick in and out here, 1 game of bowling. How much would it cost to bowl 1 single game? $2. Where'd you get that, Darius? $2 per game, right? So after 1 game, what number should go down here in this box? 2 is a great assumption, but how much did you start with? 5, exactly. You spent $3 on the shoes, right? $3 on the shoes, $2 on the game. In total, that's $5, right? What if you wanted to bowl 2 games? How much would you have spent in total then? 7, good. And we can see here that our change in y from point to point would be what? Plus 2. What'd you say? Plus 3? Close. 3 is the initial, sorry. 3 is our b, right? Wherever we see an x of 0, our y coordinate is b. But plus 2, that's going to end up being our m, or our slope. Because what's my change in x on the top from game to game? Plus 1. How much would 3 games cost? $9, right? 2, 4, 6 for the 3 games, plus the $3 we spent on the shoes. And finally, how much would the total cost be after 4 games? $11. That's right. So whenever we have a word problem, you're going to see 2 numbers given to you. One of those numbers represents your b. One of those numbers represents your m. It's up to you to figure out which one is which. The easiest way for us to figure out what m is going to be is by looking for this word right here. Per. Whenever we see per after a number, that tells us that that's going to be our slope. Pretty much every single time. If we're talking about $2 per mile, $2 per game, any type of relationship with per, that tells you that's going to be our slope. So go ahead and write that in as well. I know guys don't have highlighters, but you can just box up the word per, put an arrow, and write slope. So let's go down to number 2. We're going to find our rate of change, which is just a fancy term for slope, specifically when we have a real-life context like this bowling alley here. So we got to do change in y over change in x. What was my change in y that we found again?
2.
Plus 2. What was my change in x on the top? Plus 1. So what's that going to simplify to? 2. Not too bad, hopefully. We just spent 2 days working on tables just like this. And that's going to be our rate of change. Because remember, this is $2 per game. What was our initial value from the table that we found again? 0, 3. So we could say that b is equal to 3. And this was the initial value of renting the shoes. It's always important for us to understand the context of these numbers, especially when we have a word problem like this, because word problems are typically more difficult than just seeing an equation and being asked to solve it, or a problem and being asked to work it out. Whenever we apply a real-world context, it makes it a little bit more difficult because our numbers are disguised within a bunch of words and sentences, and that just makes it a little bit harder to work through. So our m is 2, our b is 3. We should be professionals at writing the equation by now in the form y is equal to mx plus b. Who can help me out with what that would look like? Go ahead, Roz. Exactly. Y is equal to 2x plus 3. And this equation represents y. Right? So the function, we'll talk about in Unit 5, all about functions. 2x plus 3 is a function of y. And what does y represent? Well, y represents the total dollars spent at the bowling alley. X represents the number of games bold. So if we have this equation, we can figure out what the total cost will be by plugging in a certain number of games for X. Okay, I'm going to say that again. This function here is a function of Y. Y represents the total dollars spent at the bowling alley. And X is the number of games bowled. So if we want to find out how much we would spend in total, all we have to do is plug in a certain number of games for X and solve it out to get the cost. That's what we're going to do in number 5. What would be the total cost? Total cost is Y. Total cost to bowl 10 games. Well, X represents the number of games, so 10 games will be X. All we have to do to solve this is plug in that X value for X. So we take our equation, Y is equal to 2X plus 3. We substitute out the X. What numbers should we put in those parentheses? 10. And now, just like we did in our game of Matho, we got to multiply first and then add that 3. So 2 times 10, what's that going to give us? 20. So we got Y is equal to 20 plus 3. And 20 plus 3 gives us 23. So Y is equal to $23. Make sure you put the dollar sign in front. Whenever we have a word problem, just like we talked about before, we need units on our answer, which in this case is dollars. So if you want to go to this bowling alley and apparently spend the entire day there because it would take a while to bowl 10 full games, it would only cost you $23 in total. All right? Now in the real world, it would cost much more than that, but for the sake of this problem, that's going to be our answer. Y is equal to $23 in total. Remember, Y, like we said, represents the total cost. If we look back at our table, Y is the total dollars spent as a function of X, the number of games bowled. So 10 games bowled, we work out that math, and it comes out to $23. This is the basis of what we're going to be doing on worksheet 24. Give me a thumbs up if you follow that. That makes a little bit of sense. Good. Okay, I appreciate that.